The next thing that we have to do on our request row is to make sure that we have a button on here that a user can click to attempt to approve a given request. Let's first get started by adding a button that a user can click on, and then we'll worry about adding in some logic to run anytime a user actually clicks on it. Now, I do want this to be an actual button, even though it's represented in this mockup right here as being a cell. So I want to make sure that I add in a button here from the semantic UI library. I'm going to go back over to my request row component. At the top, I'll find my semantic UI, and I'll add on a import for button as well. Then I'm going to add a new cell, and inside of it, I'll add on a new button tag. Now I'm going to give this button tag the text of approve, because whenever you click on it, you should be attempting to approve a given request. I'm going to give it a color of green rather than the previous primary that we used all over the place. I'm also going to give this another prop called basic. And I think you'll kind of like how this basic prop right here makes this button look. So let's save it right here and we'll get a good sense of what color green and basic do. So back over on my application, there we go. So it gives me this very nice looking green approve button. Of course, clicking on the button right now does absolutely nothing. So let's go back over to our component. We're going to add on a click event handler on this thing. And whenever a user clicks on this thing, we're going to want to make sure that we attempt to approve the request that this component is representing. So I'm going to add on a onClick prop. And whenever someone clicks on this thing, we're going to run a helper function that we're going to call this.onApprove. And remember, we're not going to place the parentheses here because we are not going to invoke this function right away. So now we're going to define onApprove. Inside there, we'll attempt to run some logic to approve a given request. So above my render method, I'm going to define onApprove. Now, much like a lot of the other event handlers that we've put together, this will be an asynchronous function because we're going to probably eventually have to reach out to our campaign and attempt to reference a given request and approve it in some fashion. As a quick reminder, let's flip over to our campaign file and get a quick refresher on exactly how we approve a request. So inside my contracts directory, I'll find my campaign file. I'm looking at the campaign contract, and if I scroll down a little bit, we can remember that we've got a function called approve request. So we need to call approve request, and we're going to pass in the ID or the index of the request that we want to approve. Remember that we don't have to actually specify the sender of this approval message or anything like that. The function itself is going to automatically read in the address of the person who is submitting this transaction. So all we have to do is call approve request with the index of the request. So that's not too bad. Now, you will recall, however, that we do have to get access to our campaign object or the campaign contract inside of here. So we will have to import our campaign helper function and create a new instance of our campaign. We could just pass down our campaign instance from our request index component over here, but hey, let's just get some practice on creating an actual campaign instance. No problem with that. So at the top, we'll start by importing campaign from Ethereum campaign. We'll then get a reference to our campaign by calling campaign and passing in the address of the campaign that we're currently working on. Now you will recall that we did already pass down that address into our request row. So I'm going to pass in this.props.address like so. Then underneath this, we can immediately call await campaign.methods.approve request. We have to pass in the ID or the index of the request that this component is currently looking at, which is available on this.props.id. Remember, we used this props.id thing just a moment ago when we got the ID to log out inside of a cell. So we're going to call approve request. We'll pass our ID in and we'll chain on a .send. Oops, one thing we forgot here was to get a list of all of our accounts. Let's make sure we do that right above. So we'll say const accounts is await web3 eth.get accounts. And then we can say this is from accounts at 0, like so. And we've already imported Web3, so I think we're good in that regard as well. All right, so let's test this out inside the browser. So we should be able to start up the transaction, submit the transaction, and see our number of approvals, tied to a request increment by 1. All right, so back over here, I'm going to make sure that I do a hard refresh on this entire page. Now, one thing I want to remind you about is that you can only approve a request if you are marked as an approver on the campaign itself. So if you have not yet donated to the campaign that you are looking at, when you run this function right here, you're going to get an error. So do make sure that you have donated or contributed to the campaign that you're looking at right now. So I definitely have. So I think that I can go ahead and click on the approve button right here. I should see a MetaMask transaction appear. Now, if you see something down here that says like insufficient gas or something like that, then that means that MetaMask is thinking that when you run this function, the function will probably fail. And that probably means that you have not donated to this campaign yet. So if you see something on here about insufficient gas, again, please triple check to make sure that you have already donated to your campaign. So I'm now going to submit this transaction. And then, as usual, we basically just wait. Now, there's nothing really tied to our component just yet to reflect whether or not this is going to go through successfully. All we can do is kind of wait for a bit and then eventually expect to see this approval count right here be incremented by 1. So let's take a pause right here. We're going to come back in the next video where I'm going to refresh the page, and then I'm going to eventually expect to see approval account incremented by 1. So I'll see you in just a minute.